Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of 1998 Represent. Today, we are taking a look at The Wedding Singer. I have my notes here. Let's take a look. Released February 13th, 1998. I want to say I saw this movie. I saw it in the theaters. I want to say we saw it during spring break because I think I was visiting my cousins, and the only thing we could all kind of agree on that was kind of like age appropriate, like because I think this is PG-13, was was this movie. So we all went to see it. It's clocked in at just a little over an hour and a half, like I think it's like an hour 32 minutes or something like that. So nice and kind of short, and it's a generally pretty funny movie. I think it's one of Sandler's kind of more approachable comedies. Like I think it's kind of a little less. Like a lot of people didn't like Happy Gilmore or Billy Madison based on kind of like the sense of humor being pretty like immature. I think he kind of toned that down a little bit in this one. I like those movies, but I think a lot of people didn't. So this is, I think, one of those movies where it's more approachable to kind of just everybody because his sense of humor is kind of, I feel it's dialed back a little bit. There's definitely some funny moments. He definitely like gets into the screamy kind of things he does in some of his other movies a couple times in the movie, but it definitely feels much more toned down compared to those movies. Little thing about the budget here: the budget had an $18 million budget and it made $123 million. I think this was the first of his movies to gross over $100 million. I don't think Happy Gilmore or Billy Madison grossed that, and then The Waterboy at this point hadn't come out yet. The Waterboy was, say, this was February. I want to say like The Waterboy was like September, maybe October. I don't remember. We'll probably be checking that out later in this series, depending if I can find it on streaming or like find the DVD or something like that. We'll probably check that out. It's kind of ranked as one of Sandler's best movies. Again, it stars him, Drew Barrymore, Alexis Arquette, Steve Buscemi's in it. John Lovitz is also in it. I think Steve Buscemi and John Lovitz are uncredited because I know when I watched the movie on HBO Max earlier today, I didn't notice their names in there, even though they're definitely in the movie. This is kind of I don't know which I like more, this or 51st Dates, because his chemistry with Adam Sandler's chemistry with Drew Barrymore is very good. The only one of his movies I haven't seen with her is Blended, and I don't think that one was particularly good from what I read. Had a pretty low rating. 51st Dates is really good. If you haven't seen that one, I would recommend checking it out. Wedding Singer is also, like we're talking about it now, is also very good. I don't know if I like it more, if I like 51st Dates more or less than this. They're about even. But 51st Dates is also just really good too. The soundtrack in this for this movie is quite excellent. So let's go take a look at the soundtrack here. I had the soundtrack when it came out, but I only had the first volume. I guess there's actually two albums to the soundtrack. So the first soundtrack is a cover of "Video Killed the Radio Star." It's originally by the Bugles, and the President of the United States of America covers it here in this soundtrack. Second is "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me" by Culture Club. One of the kind of funnier recurring gags in the movie is one of Adam Sandler's backup musicians, George. That's the only song they know how to play. That's really a pretty funny joke. I think they do it like three times, and I think there's like a thing about the rule of threes in comedy, and it works really well here. You have The Police with "Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic." After that, you have "How Soon Is Now" by the Smiths. Love My Way by the Psychedelic Furs, Hold Me Now by the Thompson Twins, Every Day I Write the Book by Elvis Costello, Billy Idol with White Wedding, and Billy Idol is also in the movie, has a cameo toward the end of the movie, and it's actually pretty good. You have China Girl by David Bowie. I didn't know China Girl before I saw this movie, and it's one of my favorite David Bowie songs now. There we have Blue Monday by New Order. We have "Past the Duchy" by Musical Youth. We have You Written Anything Lately? That's just an audio bit from the movie. And then there's a song by Adam Sandler, which is "Somebody Kill Me," which is written by Adam Sandler and Tim Hershey. And Sandler performs it here. And then you have the Rapper's Delight medley performed by Ellen Dow and Sugar Hill Gang. That's the rapping grandmother character, which is kind of one of the more iconic parts of the movie. The second volume has "Too Shy" by, I never can pronounce this band correctly, but it's "Too Shy" by Kaja Gugu, I think. It's "All I Can Do" by the Cars. Spandau Ballet with "True." Space Age Love Song by A Flock of Seagulls. Then that's followed by Private Idaho by the B-52s. Money, That's What I Want by the Flying Lizards. That song was also used, I believe, in Empire Records. It was a pretty good soundtrack for that one as well. You Spin Me Around Like a Record by Dead or Alive. That's kind of the introductory song to a movie sung by Adam Sandler, or his character is singing it at like a wedding party. Just Can't Get Enough by Depeche Mode. Love Stinks by the Jake Giles Band. You Make My Dreams by Hall & Oates. Holiday by Madonna. And then there's Grow Old With You, which is another Adam Sandler song. And then there's a bunch of songs that aren't included on the soundtrack, which is their songs and renditions that just appear in the movie. We have Don Commissar by After the Fire, 99, Luft Balloons, Red Balloons, what do you want to call it, by Nina. Julia's boyfriend, basically, or fiance, pops up behind her when she's singing that, kind of scares her. It's a pretty funny scene. Till There Was You by Meredith Wilson. This is performed by Ellen Dow. I always kind of do it as a Beatles song, but there's Don't Stop Believing by Journey, Boys Don't Cry by The Cure, All Night Long, All Night by Lionel Richie. That's all written by, Hayes, that's an Adam Sandler thing as well. Ladies Night by Cole and the Gang. Do You Believe in Love, which is Huey Lewis and the News. Jam on It by Nucleus. Miami Vice theme, which is a Jan Hammer thing. There's a couple pretty good Miami Vice jokes throughout the film. Hungry Heart by Bruce Springsteen. Goofball Brothers Show, which I guess is a Performed by Sorcerer. I don't remember that one. And then Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, which is Adam Sandler's former fiance is singing that to him at one point in the movie. So that's just the soundtrack. The soundtrack is amazing. It's one of my favorite movie soundtracks, kind of like ever. It's a great, just 80s soundtrack. I eventually got the second volume, so I have both the volumes, and then the songs I just listed were songs that were, in the movie but not in the soundtrack, or like heard in the background and things like that. The interesting thing about this movie was it came out in 1998, as we all know, and the 80s at that point weren't really that old. The 80s on their oldest end was 18, and on their youngest end was like 9. So it was kind of interesting that they were jumping back to 80s nostalgia like in the 90s. That kind of leads me to think that nostalgia generally comes in these 20-year cycles. So like I remember in the 90s there was a huge kind of like 70s revival. I mean, that 70s show popped up then. I think it was actually even in 1998. But then there was a bunch of other, like, I remember, like, people in my high school started, like, listening to, like, disco music more during that time period, and so on. And then, in, like, and I think that generally is true. I think we're kind of going through that now with the 90s, even though I think the 90s might be a little late for that. So I think, like, that might just be a thing where this is just something that I like doing, but I don't know if, what I'm going to say is I think the 80s are kind of immune to that 20-year cycle thing. It feels like the 80s are always in style, even after the 20-year kind of cycle thing happened. Like, we have a lot of still pretty good 80s content. I kind of am not really interested in Stranger Things anymore, but that was, like, set in the 80s in 2016. So that was, like 36 years later at the long end. You have other various movies that, like, I think they use the genre well. Like, this uses the genre well. I just saw Air. I thought that uses not the genre, the decade. It uses the decade well. Air used it well, but then Wonder Woman 1984 didn't really make use of it that much. So, because I remember in this 1998 sitting in a journalism class in high school, we were talking about the cartoons we liked as a kid, and it was, like G.I. Joe, Transformers. I think we were talking about, like, maybe, like, GoBots at one point. And then just kind of like a lot of this stuff in the 80s, and I was thinking, okay, yeah, that's probably because you're nostalgic about it, because when you're a kid, like time somewhat feels like it moves differently. It definitely feels like it's a year to like a kid is definitely feels longer than a year to like an adult or like a grown up. So I think that's why we're kind of getting nostalgic for it. But it seems like the 80s are always kind of in style in like almost everything. It feels like they kind of never really like went out of style. I'm not sure why that is, and it doesn't seem to have that effect on like other decades. Like I don't really see a lot of like people getting nostalgic for like the 70s as much, or like older decades. Like the 90s I think might be I'm nostalgic for, but I don't know if that's just me or if that's like a general like sentiment about like just the like culture in general, if they're still into like 90s stuff. I'm not really sure. But yeah, nostalgia is just like kind of like interesting in that kind of way. Let's see here. I guess like some other notes is this movie was also adapted, I think, in 2006 into a Broadway play. I think it only lasted for like 1 year, or it like was like opened in early that year and they closed out. And I guess there was also a crossover with this movie and The Goldbergs, where John Lovis's character Jimmy, who's like another wedding singer that is kind of trying to. I don't want to say he's trying to get into Adam Sandler's territory, but he's like Adam Sandler's character kind of is like after his fiance leaves like strands him at the altar, he kind of has a breakdown and it is deciding to maybe not do wedding singing anymore. And John Lewis's character is using that opportunity to kind of just like get in there and like take over that kind of industry. But that is kind of just the thoughts of the movie. We're just going to go through a basic like plot synopsis. It's super quick. So the movie starts off with Adam Sandler singing at a wedding, and then he meets Drew Barrymore, who is a server, like a dinner, like a waitress, basically at this wedding hall. They talk for a second. Adam Sandler's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be getting married." Like I think she's supposed to be working that wedding as well. And then basically what happens is his fiance just no shows the wedding, and he basically ends up starting to kind of like fall in love with Drew Barrymore's character, even though she is engaged to kind of like the villain of the movie. I think Glenn was his name. The character is kind of forgettable. Totally a jerk, but like it's completely obvious that like Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore are going to basically end up together anyway. So Adam Sandler, like once his girlfriend kind of or fiance leaves him at the altar, he has like a breakdown and stops wedding singing. Like I said earlier, John Lovis's character tries to then kind of get in on it instead. Glenn, who is Drew Barrymore's fiance, eventually proposes to her, and they like set a date. They've been engaged for like however many years at one point. One joke I liked in this movie is that he brings in a CD player. He's like, "Oh, this thing costs like $700, but it's like really cool because it's a CD player." And she's like, "Can I play a record on it?" He's like, "No, it's a CD player." And then eventually they go on like a double date. I think like I don't remember the character like how the character was related to Drew Barrymore's character. I think it's like her roommate or something. So Adam Sandler like goes on a date with Drew Barrymore's roommate. Drew Barrymore is going out with the Glenn character, so they have a double date. And then Drew Barrymore's character has to run off to the restroom. The roommate follows, and then Glenn kind of basically says like, "Oh yeah, basically I cheat on her all the time, and like because I work in the city, I work these long hours, and she's never going to find out about it," kind of thing. And then eventually, Adam Sandler comes to the realization that he thinks that she's marrying Glenn just for the money. He tries to get like a job. Kevin Nealon has like a cameo as like a bank manager or something like that, or like a financial institution of some kind. And they do the thing that they do in rom coms, where there's tension between Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore. She brings him over some musical notes or some like sheet music, and he is basically like, "Oh yeah, you're just marrying you for the money," blah blah blah. And then there's a scene later where it's at the bachelor party. Glenn comes to club. I think like I keep forgetting the guy's name is Glenn. I think it is, but he comes over drunk. Basically, like gets in a fight with Adam Sandler, beats him up, and then Drew Barrymore goes over to Adam Sandler's house. He basically says like, "You know what? I don't want to get married to this guy. I want to like go out with you." But then at that point, like Adam Sandler comes home drunk one night, and his ex fiance is there, and she kind of takes him inside, and then it's kind of implied that she now is trying to restart that relationship, and Drew Barrymore thinks that that's already happened, so she flies off to Las Vegas with Glenn to get married. Um, Adam Sandler gets on the plane. This is where the Billy Idol cameo shows up, and then basically um, he does this love song on the plane, and then they end up getting married. So, pretty basic romantic comedy, but I think it definitely uses the 80s as a very good backdrop. A lot of movies that I've seen lately, somewhat like they just kind of gloss over the fact that they're in the 80s. Like I mentioned, I think it was Wonder Woman 1984 is also set in the 80s, and it didn't really feel like it actually utilized the genre, or I keep saying calling it genre, utilized the decade. So they could have set that movie in any time period, and it probably would have made a bit of difference. But movies that use it well, like things that use it well, like I said, I'm not really into Stranger Things anymore, but they used the 80s very well. I feel like I think it was called The Other Guys. No, I think or The Good Guys, The Nice Guys. Yeah, the Bradley Cooper, not Bradley Cooper, the Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling movie used the 70s pretty well, even though some of the soundtrack on that movie threw me off just a bit because there was some stuff in there that was like from like the early 80s and not like when it was actually set. But and then another movie that used it very well, which I recently saw, was Air, and that had a great soundtrack as well. But The Wedding Singer, definitely one of my favorite Adam Sandler movies. I think it's kind of like a better balance between his normal style of comedy that you see in like Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore, and some not quite his like dramatic work, but it's a better balance, I think, um, for his style of comedy. His other stuff is good, but I think it just balances out better here and then in 51st Dates, and then you have some of the dramatic roles like Uncut Gems, which is also really good. Punch Drunk Love is very good as well. But Wedding Singer, definitely check it out. I think it's on HBO Max right now if you have it, and I would recommend it. It's like I said, it's like only an hour and a half, fairly short, but pretty good comedy and just another good movie from 1998. That's going to do it for this video. I don't know what we're going to do next. Oh, yeah, I think it's going to be a video game. I'm not sure what. But we'll be playing some video game for the next video. And then we'll be jumping back into like probably some more music, some more movies, some more games after that. Again, this has been the another episode of 1998 Represent. That's going to do it for now. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We'll see you again next time. Thanks again for watching. Take care, and have a good one.